Hi, and welcome to Mr. Fisher's Science Podcasts. This podcast is on biogeochemical cycles. So if we remember from ecosystems, energy in ecosystems flows in a one-way direction. They go from producer to consumer and so on. Biogeochemical cycles are different. Nutrients cycle through in the environment. So we're going to be looking at three different biogeochemical cycles in this podcast. We're going to start with the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle traces the nutrient carbon and how it moves through an ecosystem. So producers take in carbon from a carbon-containing compound called carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is turned into glucose in a process called photosynthesis. Plants can then change that glucose into other carbon-containing compounds to build things like leaves and stems and roots. When animals eat plants, the carbon is then converted back into glucose, and that glucose is then used to make energy in a process called cellular respiration. So the animal, maybe this cow here, will break down that grass into sugar and will release the carbon back into carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is then released into the environment and the cycle continues. Fossil fuels. Sometimes carbon gets trapped, and carbon that's trapped for a long period of time can turn into a fossil fuel. Fossil fuels are things like petroleum, coal, natural gas. We use those to produce energy in our homes. The burning or the combustion of fossil fuels also releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So to review, pause the podcast and quickly jot down the carbon cycle shown. Okay, the oxygen cycle is very similar to the carbon cycle. They're both linked in that plants will use water during photosynthesis, and plants release oxygen as a gas into the atmosphere. The oxygen is then used by humans and animals in cell respiration, and carbon dioxide is given off. Okay, the carbon dioxide is then used by producers in photosynthesis, and oxygen is given off. So the oxygen cycle and the carbon cycle are very closely linked together. The nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen cycle is a little different. So nitrogen is found in all living things. It's used to build proteins like muscle, skin. Nitrogen gas we find in the atmosphere. So this is a pie chart showing composition of the atmosphere. Nitrogen gas makes up about 78% of the Earth's atmosphere. We can't use this gas. So the chemical formula for nitrogen is N2. So certain bacteria can change nitrogen gas into nitrates and ammonia. The process to do this is known as nitrogen fixation. Now, nitrogen fixation occurs in the roots of legume plants like this clover here or this alfalfa. All plants can then take nitrates and ammonia in the soil and turn them into plant proteins. When animals eat plants, they convert plant proteins into animal proteins. So for example, when you eat things like breads, beans, or any other plant matter, your body converts them into muscle, hair, fingernails, and other animal proteins. Same thing is true when you eat animals. Your body converts animal proteins into the proteins your body needs. When plants and animals die, decomposers break down their remains. Some of the bacteria and fungi can cause proteins to decay back into nitrates and ammonia, which can then be taken up and used by plants. Other bacteria can convert nitrates and ammonia back into nitrogen gas. This process is known as denitrification. This also occurs when bacteria convert animal waste and plant waste into nitrogen gas. So in all of the examples that we talked about, notice the relationship between nitrogen fixation and denitrification in the environment. Now, chemists have also created an industrial process that creates nitrates and ammonia, and this produces our industrial fertilizers, which we use to grow better crops. So again, as a review, this concludes the podcast. but please make sure you copy down the nitrogen cycle shown.